Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about gas tanks. Now these gas tanks or fluid tanks, liquid tanks, whatever you want to call them, they contain liquid and you have the pre-made option or a custom built option. Now hopefully you understand these things from other videos that I've made or your own experience, but we're going to talk about how things flow into and from them, capacity, all kinds of stuff. Pretty much this video is supposed to serve as a one-stop shop for fluid tanks and how they work. Now this actually came about because I was building a creation and I found that the liquid was kind of draining through and my gas tank dials were no longer working and all that stuff. So then I was like, all right, let's see exactly what's going on, because after this compressed gas update, I'm sure you noticed that we've had a lot of different changes, and especially to the gas tanks and fluid mechanics. So stay tuned. In this video we're going to go through these trials and I'll do my best to explain and sort of understand what's going on. As I mentioned, we have pre-made gas tanks and custom made gas tanks or diesel tanks or liquid tanks. So we're going to first take a look at the pre-made tanks and then we're going to go over to the customs. Now one thing to note is that there are different sizes of the pre-made tanks. So the smallest one here, if I hover over it, you could see that it's containing 30.94 liters of diesel, the second row from the top. But then also near the bottom here in the green, it says the capacity. So it's 31.25 liters. Now I'm not exactly sure where the developers came up with these numbers. They're not very even, but it is what it is. So here we have diesel, we have the capacity, and then we have some other gases, the air pretty much, the oxygen, the atmosphere is in there. Now this came after that compressed gases update, and you'll see that because of that, we're actually missing maybe like 0.3 liters of diesel is not currently in this tank. Likewise in here, we have 185.62 liters of diesel, whereas our capacity is 187.5. So we're missing 1.5 liters or so of diesel because of that air mixture. And lastly in here, we have just under 700, we have 696.09 liters of diesel and a capacity of 703.12. Again, not sure where these numbers came from. I would have thought this should have been like 700, 200 and whatever, 30, but doesn't matter. And you could see that because of that, now we're missing something higher, maybe like 6 liters of diesel is now missing or something like that, 7. So the gas update did change that, but anyways, we're going with these numbers. Now these guys are filled, whereas in my test here, all the orange ones do not have any diesel. So you'll notice that all of them are without diesel, whereas the yellow ones do contain diesel. Now, if we hover over this, it tells us we have 30.94 liters of diesel available in this small tank, whereas if I hover over this one, it's telling us we have 13.5. Now this was quite concerning to me when I was building my creation, because I was like, why am I missing so much gas? And over here, even worse, we have 8.69. So because of this, we have 3 different amounts of diesel from the exact same tank. Now what we know the fluid pump does is actually act as a directional filter, so it only allows flowing from in to out when we've pressed the button. So right now there's no diesel in the bottom tank and we're just kind of waiting. So what I want to do is when I turn this on, we could empty this top tank up from diesel. So now it says 0 liters of diesel, whereas the bottom is now telling us we're at 30.08. So we're now closer to this. We're almost identical. So we've pumped all the diesel into the bottom tank there. Now one thing to note is I did a test and I made a video about this too, is that you have to have the gas relief valve on your tanks, otherwise in the long run you're going to end up breaking your tanks. What's going to happen is you're going to use your hose and a hose fitting to keep filling your tank up, but eventually it's going to get so pressurized from the atmosphere going into it, the oxygen, the air, the hydrogen, all this stuff, or nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, all this stuff will be in that tank that you will no longer be able to fill it up. So this fluid port and gas relief valves prevents you from breaking your diesel tank. Again, as I mentioned in previous videos and even suggested to the developers, I really wish they gave us an option to just select your small tank and have a built-in gas relief valve rather than this, like simply in the workbench. You would just select it, but anyways, we're going with what we know. So again, as I said, here we had 13 liters of diesel, here we have 8.69, but what's happening is there's actually some diesel in this gas relief valve. So when I push this button, you could see this drained out, and if I let go of the button, if we hover over this, it's 29 liters, so a little less than that. But what I've actually heard is that the gas relief valve sometimes traps some of the diesel. So if I keep holding this, you actually see that my diesel number is decreasing, which is kind of funky, to be honest. It does stabilize eventually. I'm not sure if this is a glitch or whatnot, but now it's 27 liters of diesel. Up here, it's still 0 liters of diesel, so I'm not sure if it's just trapped in the pump, but here when we hold it, it's not going down. So not sure why that's happening. A bit of a bug in my opinion, but it is what it is. So you, at max, you lose like, you know, almost 3 liters of diesel. Not great, but not the end of the world, especially if it means having a system that works properly. Over here, we have one diesel tank full of diesel, and this one is no diesel. So actually this one should have been orange. But the point is, between this, if we open up this valve, the system stabilizes. So we have 5.3 and 5.3. So in Stormworks, diesel does not flow downwards. In real life, obviously what would have happened is this tank would be empty, everything would be in this one, right? It would have just flowed right through that. Here, what happens is it treats the system as equilibrium. So as soon as you open that, every tank in the system is in equilibrium regardless of how it flows. It will never just flow out of this one down this and into there. No, it's going to be in the whole thing. But keeping this valve open and holding now this, we can drain the diesel from these tanks. And here we have it, 29.99. So we've pretty much regained all of our diesel from the thing, starting off with that one tank, and now we have pretty much the same as that one tank. Now, what I wanted to do here is show you that in this instant, we have 13.57, and in this case, we have 8.69. They're the same thing, except this one has that gas relief valve, and this one here is the same as this one with that gas relief valve. So if we just go ahead and open these up, you'll see that it goes up to that kind of 30 mark, and then it starts to drop the exact same way as the previous test. Not quite sure why again, but it works the same way. Now, again, this number here, put the diesel all through that system. So this one we're showing 8.69. This one here we're showing 13.57, which is interesting, right? Keep in mind, those are the same numbers we had here. So even though this uses a lot of these pipes, and this one just had a singular tank with a pump, it is the same number. And of course, when we pump it into here, of course opening the valve, we recoup all that diesel again. And likewise here, we open up the valve, let this come in here, it will fill up and then drain again, go down just like it did. So they do behave the same. And I don't want to get repetitive, of course, but it's just keeping in mind that the behavior is consistent. So we have a bunch of piping here and here. Even though it is there, it doesn't actually fill it up per se. It just acts the same way as just having an attachment. That's kind of what I've seen. I just did a quick respawn just to recap that. So here, gas tank pump, no gas relief valve. It has 13.57. This one has 8.69 with the gas relief. Over here, 13.57, and over here 8.69. 8.69, 13.57. So it did not matter whether it's a pump, whether it is a gas relief valve, or whether it is piping and a gas relief valve. It seems those values are consistent throughout. So that is the first setup here. Now, in this instant here, we don't even have a gas tank or fluid tank. All we have is the actual hose anchor, some piping, and the valve, and a pump. So what we're going to do here is actually go over to the gas pump, plug it in, and we're going to attach the hose to these fittings. and see what happens. So right now, of course, there's not going to be any diesel because the valve is closed. And we're going to fill this one up too. And then unplug it, so we're no longer attached to the gas. And now, if we open up the valve and run the pumps, in theory, let's see what was in the system. Here was just a fluid hose anchor and a closed valve. Here was a bunch of piping, the valve, and in this case we have 39.17, and in this case we have 39.17. So take a look at that. What it appears to me is that this thing filled up with diesel, this thing filled up with diesel, and then when I opened it up and pumped it out, we ended up with that 39.17 liters. So you can actually overfill or pre-fill after you spawn a vehicle with additional diesel and give you even more range and capacity, which is good to know. So your starting point may not even be the max amount you can have. What I'm saying is, if we had a hose attachment here, which you might test out after, we're going to get more diesel than if we just had the tanks. Kind of want to test that right away. So what we have here is the old system with all that piping, the closed valve, that one's empty, and then over here that one's empty. Whereas here we have this guy, closed valve, this one has 0, and this tank. Now if we plug this in, and I did add a gas relief valve so it matches. So the only difference now is that this one we've added additional diesel to. So now if I open up the valve, and pump in to the bottom tank, this one's going to get us that 30, right? So it's pretty much what was ever started in that. This one again should have been orange. This one had 0 to start with, so we're at 29. Let's see what we get here. Whoa. All right. I like the sound of that. So this system, because we overfilled, let's say, or we pre-filled after we spawned the creation, it filled up the pipes, and it actually now gave us 172 liters rather than just that plain old 30. So that is a substantial difference. If you have a decent amount of piping in your vehicle, you can end up really adding much more gas when you fill it up. So that's quite interesting to note. So these things here, even though there is not a gas tank per se, you still end up with gas in this system. So let's say you have a creation that just uses a fluid hose anchor attached directly to the fuel manifold. You probably could still end up with some diesel in your engine without even having a tank. You just can't fire it up from the get-go. Oh, but what you can do is end up with like 73. Now I did open the valve a little bit, so it probably isn't that number, but doesn't matter. Even still, it flooded this thing up and gave us diesel in our system without even having a gas tank. So quite interesting. Onto these series of tests, what I've done is added a fluid port end here just to allow the transfer of only the diesel coming from these tanks and not the gas, but that really shouldn't change our results. But really what I wanted to do here is test out if we have 2 or more tanks in sequence, or more than one tank in sequence, do we still end up with that 30 liters and 30 liters coming from the small one, or is there some kind of multiplying factor that reduces it? Maybe if there's 2, it's not going to be 30 and 30, maybe it's 20 and 20. And if we have 3, maybe it's 15 and 15 and 15. So I don't know. I've heard rumors or talks about something like that, and I want to confirm it once and for all for myself. So what I do have is these ones are full. There is a gas relief valve, and as I turn this on and push this button, everything should drain out of these top 2 tanks. So here it's saying 0 and 0 diesel, and in here we have 60. So we've actually proven right now in this test at least that it is just 30 and 30, giving us a total of 60. It's not reduced if you have multiple tanks in sequence that you end up with a smaller number. Now that is with them being directly linked. Now in this instant here, we have 10 and we have 10. Here we have 8.69 in both of them, and that's because of the different things that we have attached. But this one should be pretty much talking to it right away, or rather connected. So when we open up this valve and run the pump, and make sure we've drained all the diesel from both tanks. In here we have 60. So it's pretty much told us that even in this instant where we just have a hose connected to it, that it's 60. Now in this case we still got 60 with the valve. So it does give us kind of the conclusion at least that the tanks are always 30, even if they're in sequence, even if you have a multiple array, and you still get that full 60. Those are what I had in mind for the pre-made tanks, kind of giving us a bit of an idea of what's going on with all them. Now here we have the custom built tanks. So first things first, this one is very simple inside. It's literally just fully boxy. Next one, I did something a little more fancy, used some of the triangular pieces, and this one I made it actually look kind of like a jack-o'-lantern. So what do we get when we use these different pieces like this? Well, here we have 92.81 liters of liquid or diesel in here. Here we have 278. So keep in mind that's a large increase by just adding this, and over here 556. Okay, so we went from 90, pretty much tripled it here, and I would say 5 times higher here. In the same overall shape of the box, you can give yourself much more capacity if you use these triangular pieces. So I always try when it's a smaller vehicle to do this. Now, word of advice, you don't want to go crazy like this for a huge ship, I would say, just to prevent lag, because this type of setup is much more efficient in Stormworks and will create much better shapes, which will also prevent lagging in your game, especially if you use the physics flutter. But that's your own discretion. So that is the basic gist of these custom tanks. You can build them as large or as small as you want. Obviously small, but you still have to have a liquid meter and presumably a hose outlet and the fluid port end and stuff. And even still, you'll want to have it connected to one of these gas relief valves. See, I didn't do that here, but we're just going to run a very simple test. Here we have 66 liters, and here we have 0. If I open up this valve, it will round itself off or find equilibrium, but keep in mind that there's still gas or diesel in that little valve. So what we do with this test is, again, open this up, 32, 32. If I run the pump, we can bring it back up and let's see, it goes. So we're still pumping. Now keep in mind, again, with this system not having the gas relief valve, it's going to take longer because what we're doing actually is pumping gas in as well. I don't have a gas sensor in here, or gas meter, but you'd see that we're increasing the atmosphere and pressure in this bottom one and preventing as much of these ones from actually flooding into it. So it's kind of slowed down up there, but you could see that we've reached 90. So we've reached pretty much close to what we had here. So this is what we have here. These ones are all actually that kind of boring square shape intentionally, so they're the same. So you can see that 90 has now come out of that top one through here into there. So you still get that same starting point is what I want to say. We know now that the flutter, like the gas fluid spawner, diesel spawner, does not flood any of these external pieces. It only floods that initial shape and kind of goes down from there. So there you have it. We've gone through the pre-made, we've gone through custom tanks, some of the things, the tricks, the key elements to keep in mind. Hopefully this video helped you. If not, give me some comments of what you'd like to have seen or for me to have included. And as always, thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next video. Stay tuned for more creations, and see you next time. Happy Stormworksing, everyone.